Inventory management. Inventory management is a very important topic because inventories are a cost, and so you want to manage the cost. But inventories also allow you to serve demand, provide a customer service, availability of product to the customer, and so they also help support revenue for the company. Because they impact revenue, they impact cost, they impact profitability, and so it's really important that you understand inventory management really well. This topic is often covered after covering forecasting and basic capacity management, because forecasting, capacity, and inventory are related. If the forecast tells you you're going to sell a certain amount in the next few months or next year, you often compare it with your capacity. Do I have the capacity to satisfy that demand? And if you have enough capacity, you might be like, this is easy, I can satisfy this demand. And if you don't have enough capacity, particularly at certain times, because for some products the demand will peak for a short amount of time. Think about the things that sell a lot around Halloween or things that sell a lot around Thanksgiving. The demand could change drastically in that season versus the rest of the year. And so you may say, well, even though I have enough capacity, I don't have the capacity to meet seasonal peaks, so maybe I'm going to use inventory management to fill the gap. And if your capacity is not going to be sufficient, or the lead time is very long, you still may need inventory for these other reasons as well. So even if you have a lot of capacity in your supplier network, but the suppliers are all far away, you may try to figure out, okay, how much inventory do I need? Then the forecast error can also influence this decision, because the forecast error can tell you the variability in demand you can expect, and you may want to have some safety stock to handle that variability. So we often look at forecasting, the forecast error, capacity, and inventory together when we are planning the operations of a company or planning the operations in an entire supply chain. So these three topics are all very important, and they all tie and feed into each other. So with that in mind, let's study inventory management. The agenda for this lecture overall, which may be in multiple parts. So for the series of lectures on inventory management, we're going to talk about the reason we need inventories, how much to order when we do place an order, when to order. So inventory management systems tend to answer these two questions, gives you an inventory policy which answers the questions of how much to order and when to order. And this is about finished goods, so how much to order of a finished good to store as inventory and when to order. And the order, when we say how much to order, it doesn't mean you are ordering necessarily outside the company. You could be placing the order with a production team or production unit or factory to produce the goods, or you could be placing the order with a supplier who may supply you with that finished good, especially in the case of retail. We'll talk about the ABC classification of inventory. We'll talk about a second inventory management system called the periodic review system. And then we'll talk about inventory management for seasonal goods, or the one period inventory model. Okay, so this will cover the basics of inventory management, and more advanced topics may be covered in more advanced courses, but this is the fundamentals or essentials that you need for this course. So why have inventory in the first place? This is very important to understand, because I've heard phrases from students who have not been educated well say things like inventory is evil, or you must always drive down inventory. And hopefully by the end of this lecture you realize that that is not true. There's nothing inherently evil about inventory. Raw materials cost money. They have a cost. So are they evil if inventory is evil just because it has a cost? Some people, perhaps they drive their opinions from having looked at companies that had too much inventory, which is fine. If a company has too much excess of any resource, that doesn't mean we just discount that resource and call it evil. Now, when a company does have too much inventory, it's very interesting that the solution is not always to reduce inventory across the board. Because if a company does have too much inventory, that means they are making a mistake in their analysis or ordering decisions. They're ordering too much. But it's very rare that a company would make a mistake of ordering too much consistently for every single thing that they need. Usually they're making mistakes both ways. Some things they're ordering too much, some things they're ordering too little. And so this quote by Teiichi Ohno is extremely perceptive and gets to the heart of the issue. The more inventory a company has, the less likely they'll have what they need. It doesn't mean they'll less likely to have everything that they need, but some things that they need they'll have less of. Because if your analysis and your ordering decisions are flawed and you're ordering too much in some cases, most likely you're making the error the other way for some other cases, for some other SKUs or products where you're ordering too little. In my experience as well, whenever I've analyzed inventory, and I've also looked at some published cases where people have written a business case with some data about analyzing inventory, almost always you find that overall there may be too much inventory, but some key items or some needed products or SKUs have too little inventory as well. Because when you have a flawed or less precise ordering system, less precise analysis, you're going to make errors both ways. Some things you're going to order too much, some things you're going to order too less. And so it's very, very rare, I haven't seen it, that you go to a company and you need to reduce inventory across the board of every single thing. You might be right-sizing the inventory, reducing it in some situations, increasing it in other situations. That's very common, which is why I don't like statements like inventory is evil, because that sounds like you want to reduce all inventory of every single thing all the time, which is not true. Okay, so let's understand what is inventory to understand why we need inventory. Inventory is a stock of materials used to satisfy customer demand or to support the production of services or goods. Inventory usually exists because we have lead times to get stuff. We can't materialize things out of thin air instantaneously. If you lived in a Harry Potter type of world where you could just swing your wand and create something out of nothing instantaneously, you wouldn't need inventory. Whenever you needed something, you would just whip out your wand and you would have it. But we don't live in that world. In the world we live in, things have a lead time. If you want something today, you probably need to order it earlier than today so that it would have arrived by yesterday and be ready for you to use today. Also, there are capacity limitations. Your supplier may have capacity limitations. They may have less capacity to offer you in a busy season because they have other customers, things like that. So you may have to order in advance. So all these reasons to do with capacity mismatches and lead times require us to have inventory so we can continue to support customer demand and have sales, and also continue to support our production processes. So inventory of any particular thing, you can think of this diagram, which shows something coming in, so inflow of materials into this container, and then there's outflow of material, and then there's some loss as well. So scrap flow could be things that expire or get damaged in our warehouse, so there's some loss as well. Usually whenever you have inventory, 100% of inventory doesn't get used to satisfy customer demand. Some of it may get damaged, some of it may expire, so it's all hopefully that's very little, but there's usually going to be some non-zero level of loss as well. The net effect of the inflow, the outflow, and the loss is going to give you the inventory level, how much material you have in the container. The container is think of it as an abstract idea, not like a bucket. The container could be your warehouse, could be the back shop of your store, could be the shelves of your retail store, could be storage right next to an assembly line, which is using the materials to assemble something. So, don't think of it as like a container, like a physical container. It could just be any place where inventory is stored. Okay? So inflow is things coming in, outflow is things going out, and scrap is also things being discarded. So if the outflow and the scrap are less than the inflow, then the inventory level will start to rise because more stuff is coming in than going out. If the reverse happens, if the outflow over some time and the scrap together are more than the inflow, then the inventory level will start to fall because what's going out of the system is more than what's coming in. So over time, the inventory level will fluctuate. Sometimes it will go up when you receive a big shipment of incoming material, and then as you use the material or sell it, it'll start to go down, and so it'll go up and down over time. And so often we look at inventory levels over time to see what's happening with the system. Now, the inflow and the outflow or the inventory level we want to target or maintain. When we talk about inventory level we always talk about the average inventory level, because as I mentioned, inventory level will go up and down. Incoming shipment arrivals goes up, right? So inventory level on average, what inventory level do we want to have? What is the right inventory level to have? That depends on the balance of two opposing types of forces. There's going to be some pressures or incentives to have large inventories in a system that will make the inventory level, make you want to have the inventory level higher. And then there'll be pressures to have less inventories in the system that will make you want to push the inventories down. And as the inventory level that's the right it depends upon the balance of these forces and which ones are more salient. So let's look at these forces and you understand what I'm talking about. So what are the pressures for having small inventories, for having less inventory? Maintaining inventory incurs cost. The first one is cost of capital, because you usually have to spend some money to purchase the inventory, or even if it's being produced in-house, you have to pay the workers, pay for the raw materials to have it produced. So whether it's produced in-house or whether the inventory is coming from outside the company, from a supplier, you're going to have to spend money to get that inventory in the place that you want it. And you have to pay for its production, or pay the supplier, pay the transportation expense, pay the expense to have it stored in the warehouse or wherever you want it. So there's a cost that you have paid. If you didn't have that much inventory, you would pay less money to get the inventory. And so it ties up your working capital. Some money that the company has needs to be spent to generate that inventory. And now until you sell that and get money from the customer, that money is tied up in inventory. So that money is not earning interest in a bank. That money is not being invested in other projects or opportunities around the firm. So there's a cost to that. And that's called the cost of capital. If you go to the accounting team in your company, you ask them, what is the weighted average cost of capital for my company? They'll be able to give you a number and say, in our company, the opportunity cost of investing capital in anything is this much, like this % per year or something. Because if we didn't invest money in this XYZ thing, we would have put it in a bank or bought bonds or done this or that with it and earned so much income. And so that's the opportunity cost of using it for inventory or whatever else you're using it for. So that's a cost, and we don't like cost, so that wants us to have less inventory. On top of the cost of capital, you have storage and handling costs. So wherever inventory is stored, you may need to maintain the temperature or security of that area. You will usually have workers there to offload trucks and put the thing away. That's all handling cost, and pick it up and pack it to send it to retail store or the customer. And then that place itself may have rent or some financing cost. You may have utility bills for that place, and so on, right? So you will have some cost just to store product or inventory. And if you are storing valuable inventory, or it's worth a significant amount of money, you may want to insure the inventory. There could be a natural disaster, hurricane happens, or a fire breaks out and your inventory burns up or is destroyed. You don't want to have to write off hundreds of millions of dollars. So sometimes, companies have a policy. They might want to insure the inventory and may have to pay an insurance premium for that. So obviously the more inventory you have, the more you have to pay to insure that level of inventory. And then whenever you store inventory, there are going to be some losses over time. No matter what you do, you can reduce these losses over time, called shrinkage, but it's not feasible usually to make it exactly zero. So why does shrinkage happen? While you're handling material, moving it around, there could be deterioration or damages. So something falls down, something gets damaged while it's being picked up by a forklift. Something deteriorates because of natural deterioration over time. And so things like, let's say, certain chemicals or certain things made of wood, they may naturally deteriorate over time. Then there could be obsolescence, things like food, medicine, or other things that have an expiry date. If some of the inventory that you created or purchased, you're not able to use it before the expiry date, now it has to be thrown out. So there could be obsolescence, there could be deterioration, and then there could be pilferage, which is stealing, usually in small amounts repeatedly. So if there's something small that somebody could easily hide and carry out, you may have some of that going on in your inventory storage places as well. In the logistics course, I cover warehouse operations in more detail, and this is a big topic there on what are the best practices to reduce pilferage. But what we should know at this point is that there is going to be some pilferage, and the more inventory you have, if pilferage, let's say, 0.5% or 0.1%, 0.1% of a bigger number is a bigger cost, and so the more inventory you have, the more of these shrinkage costs you will face. Now, what are pressures or incentives that make us want to have inventory? Because that's the other side of the coin. So inventories allow us to deal with uncertainty and variability. Uncertainty is unknown things. So it's like forecast error. Your demand on average might be 100, but it could be more or less. And so that uncertainty about exactly what demand would be, if you only produce 100 items and your demand turns out to be 110, then you lose sales for the extra 10. But if you keep some safety stock, some inventory, in addition to what the inventory that you produce just to sell the forecasted value, then that additional inventory will help you hedge against uncertainty. If the demand does turn out to be more than 100, you have the inventory ready to cater to that demand. So uncertainty has to do with unknowable changes. Okay, it's something that you couldn't know and it happened. Like, you try to forecast demand as accurately as possible, but the true demand turned out to be different, turned out to be higher. Uncertainty could be things like a shipment gets delayed. So you're running a factory and you have these components that you need to produce cars. I remember that once there was this earthquake in Japan, which knocked out some semiconductor factories. And those semiconductor chips were being used in automotive industry in the US. And for like a $30, $40 chip, a lot of cars, like a $30,000 vehicle could not be completed. The manufacturing could not be completed because the chip was the supply was disrupted for that chip because of the earthquake damaging the factory in Japan. Obviously, when the earthquake happened and damaged the factory, whatever inventory of the chip was there at the North American automotive factory, they used up that inventory. And when the inventory ran out, then you have to just, stop the assembly line. Or what some companies did was they produced the cars without the chip and then had customers come back after some months to get the chip installed in the car. So customers didn't have the full functionality of the vehicle for several months, which is something customers didn't like. And so if you had larger inventory in the factory, maybe you could have used those chips until the factory came back online and you wouldn't have had this disruption. So inventories can help you deal with disruptions in supply. They can help you deal with unexpected demand or uncertain demand. And then they can also help you deal with variability. What's the difference with variability and uncertainty? The way I'm using it here is that variability is a variation or change. But you're kind of expecting that change. So think about seasonality. So you know that your sales go up in the last quarter of the year, and so that causes variability in your sales pattern. Now, it's much harder to adjust capacity. You can't just increase capacity in the last quarter, then decrease capacity, then increase it again in the last quarter. Capacity is expensive to change capacity, move capacity up or down. So really this variability in demand caused by seasonality, you can have a stable level of capacity, but build inventories in the off season and store them so you can sell them in the high sales season. Now, this is not uncertainty. You know your sales are going to go up in the fourth quarter. You have a very good idea exactly how much they're going to go up by from past experience. And so it's not uncertain. The future is not uncertain. You know what's going to happen in the coming quarter to some degree of confidence. or to some degree of precision, not maybe exactly, but to some degree of precision. And so you can use inventory to deal with the variability instead of having to move your capacity up or down. So that's variability. Because it's costly to change our capacity, we can use inventory to smooth over the ups and downs in the demand pattern or seasonal variation in demand that you saw in the forecasting lecture, that there's seasonality in demand. And so we can use inventory to deal with that. And then we can also use seasonality to deal with uncertain events like unexpected demand, unexpected supply disruptions, things like that. Inventories also help you have a high level of customer service because they can improve on-time delivery, reduce stockouts and back orders. So if you carry some inventory and let's say you place an order with the supplier to replenish the inventory, and before the order has arrived, you're running kind of low. If you have too little level of safety stock or inventory, you may run to zero and then you have lost sales because now you have zero inventory and the supplier's order hasn't arrived because there's a lead time to that. And now customers want your product. You're like, please wait, my supplier is sending over the shipment. I'm going to get it. I'm going to sell it to you. That reduces customer service levels because if there's customers can buy the same or similar things from elsewhere, they'll go elsewhere to buy it. They may not wait. Or they may think of you as, okay, this company is not reliable. I don't want to pay them a price premium, or I don't want to shop with them unless I have to. Or you might promise them that I'm place your order today and I will fill your order, then you can pay me when I get the goods and when I fill your order, and I'm going to try to expedite your order. So to have a back order, there's usually also cost. You may have to expedite the shipment, pay more for that. You may have to deliver to the customer's home. You have to give the customer a discount or something to get the back order from them and avoid them having to go to a competitor. So all of these things that can hurt customer service, you can avoid that if you do have the inventory on hand. Obviously, if you have things that expire quickly, you don't want too much inventory on your hand because then they could expire and be ruined and then you have to throw them out. So it's a balancing act between pressures for small inventories and pressures for large inventories. Ordering cost. If you incur a high cost each time an order is placed, then you're likely to place few large orders. Okay. And when you place a few large orders instead of many small orders, you're going to have a high inventory level. You'll see that when we talk about cycle inventory in detail, why that happens. But for now, just know that if you're making large orders, the orders could be to your production team to produce on the factory, like run a large batch, or the order could be to your supplier. Whenever you have large lot sizes or batch sizes in a system, because you're ordering large quantities infrequently, you're going to have high inventory levels in the system. And if you order small quantities very frequently, you're going to have less inventory in the system. So sometimes, there's cost associated with producing a batch or processing an order that force you to make less orders and make larger orders and create inventory. And then you're balancing the inventory cost with the cost of ordering. And we'll see all that. We'll see when you decide how much to order, you balance these costs, balance these competing objectives where you don't want to pay a lot of ordering cost, but you also want to pay a lot of holding costs. So how do you balance the two? Setup cost is like ordering cost, but it's like for a production scenario, whereas ordering cost is usually with a faraway supplier. But same idea, you have to set up a batch, and so you want to do big batches and less frequent changeovers. Utilization issues sometimes, and it's not necessarily always optimal to just produce things before you need them. But sometimes it can happen that your demand fluctuates, and when your demand is low, you don't want to have workers just sit idle or fire them and then rehire them when demand goes up, because all that is also expensive. And maybe the thing you're producing doesn't have an expiry date. It can last a long time in a warehouse, and you have a warehouse in a cheap part of the country, or real estate is cheap for you, and there's not a lot of cost to store that item. So you might say, hey, it's too costly to adjust my workforce levels, and it's cheaper for me to hold the inventory. So maybe I should just have the workers produce things in anticipation of future demand and just store them, because it's not very expensive for me to store them, and that can lead to inventory too. Economies of scale in transportation, another reason why you can have inventory, because you don't want to have many small shipments. Similar idea to ordering costs and setup costs. You don't want to have many small shipments because that's too expensive. And you might as well ship in truckloads because that's cheaper in shipping, or rail car loads if you're shipping by rail. Especially if your item is not like an iPhone, which sells for like, I don't know, $500 or $1,000. If you are making something that sells like you have wood, cement, sand, these sorts of commodities that are not very expensive per unit weight, then the transportation expense can be a big cost as a percentage of the total cost that you have. And so you want to really optimize the transportation cost because you don't have a lot of margin to play with. With an iPhone, you may have a lot of margin to play with, and even if the transportation costs a little bit more, it doesn't matter to you as much, right? But for these other items, the transportation cost may be significant, and so you may want to go for economies of scale in transportation, ship in truckloads or rail car loads. Even if you need like half a truck for the next month, you order a full truckload because it might as well get it in and store the inventory here than to have two half truckloads coming in every month or something, and because it's cheaper to ship in full truckloads, for example. And then quantity discounts. The supplier it may be cheaper for the supplier for the same reason we mentioned, like setup cost or other costs. It may be cheaper for the supplier to run a large batch for you, and the supplier may say, hey, if you place an order for this much, I can give you a discount, but if you place small quantity orders, I cannot give you a discount. And so maybe that quantity discount is so significant that, and your inventory, your storage costs are not that high, you say, okay, it's worth it for me to get the quantity discount, order extra. And then the extra cost I pay for holding this inventory is not that much, so net, I'm better off. A very related idea is also minimum order quantities. Suppliers will sometimes have an MOQ, minimum order quantity. You cannot place an order for less than that. And that's the minimum order quantity. And a lot of times in purchasing, people are trying to negotiate the MOQs and so forth. So you have to order the MOQ, even if the MOQ says 1,000 units, and even if you only need 500, you'll have to order 1,000, and that will lead to inventories. And there's nothing you can do about that rather than go to another supplier or somebody with a lower MOQ. And the supplier will sometimes increase price if you go for a lower MOQ. You say, okay, I don't want to order 1,000, just give me 500. The supplier says, okay, then my price is going to go up because it costs me, some of my costs are the same whether you order 500 or 1,000 because they're fixed cost. And then if I'm splitting the fixed cost over 500 units instead of 1,000 units, then your per item or per unit cost is going to be higher. So you're paying me 5 minutes a widget before, $5 a widget before. Now you need to pay me $6 a widget because I'm, my costs don't scale like that. And so it's going to still, I'm not going to make any money if I give it to you for $5 a widget when you only order 500, for example. Okay? So hopefully after looking at these reasons, you can understand the pressures for large inventories and pressures for small inventories, and how they balance out can kind of determine how much inventory you have. Next, we're going to talk about how much to order or produce. Okay, and we're going to take an approach which tries to optimize our costs to do that. Often just kind of guessing how much to produce or order is not a good idea. And so that's why, this quote by Deming is very relevant. Without data to back up your assertion, you're just another person with an opinion. So we want to approach these questions about inventory management in a scientific way, try to see, okay, what's the right way to think about how much to order. Because if you order more, you're going to have higher inventories in your system. If you order less, you're going to have less inventory, so it affects your inventory level. Okay, so let's understand this setup about lot size in replenishment and production. Yeah? Think about your supplier shown on in the blue box, and you are the buyer company, and you place an order for quantity Q, and then this box represents the quantities shipped to you from the supplier. Now, sometimes your supplier is just almost a part of your factory, like right next door, and you can actually run an assembly line from your supplier's factory to your factory. This has been done in soda companies like Pepsi, Coca-Cola. I don't remember the exact brand, but one of those companies, they had a supplier that made these cans that you fill the soda in, aluminum cans. And they had this assembly line run from the supplier's facility, like their facilities were connected. So the assembly line on which cans were produced, the same assembly line fed into the filling plant, which filled the soda into the can and then kind of sealed it at the top and then packed it up. So it almost like was one operation, but the can production was a different company, can supplier, and the filling and packaging was a different company. That was the bottler, the company that fills that mixes water with the compound for Coke or Pepsi or whatever and creates the soda and fills it in bottles or cans. Right. And you may do it with plastic bottle as well. Plastic bottle gets created, moves over to the bottling plant, gets filled with soda, and then gets packed. And so in that case, you can have one piece flow. If in a particular day I want to fill up 5,000 cans of soda, I tell my supplier to set their factory to produce 5,000 cans, and one by one the 5,000 cans come through and they get filled and packed, and there's no inventory really. The only inventory is the cans flowing across the assembly line, getting filled or created at a particular amount of time. It's work in process inventory. There's no other inventory until the cans are filled and packed, and then there's finished goods inventory at the end. But between the bottler plant which fills the soda and the supplier of the cans, there's really no inventory other than like one or two pieces at a time. But that's a very special situation. In most situations, the supplier is not connected to your operation, and the supplier could be far away, could be outside the state, could be outside the country, could be outside the continent, could be on the other side of the world. And so imagine having a supplier on the other side of the world and you ask them to ship you one piece at a time. It's going to be really expensive shipping. And then, you're not going to do that. It's not going to be feasible. Okay. So it's too expensive to have one piece flow over long distances. And so you're going to have to figure out some order quantity queue that makes sense to order that quantity and receive it. So that queue with what you call your lot size or batch size or order size, these are all three terms kind of used interchangeably, because if you're talking about a production scenario, people often like to say lot size or batch size. If you're talking about ordering from a supplier, people often like to say order size. But for inventory management, the effect on inventory is the same. And so we usually use queue to refer to this quantity, and queue is going to be our order size. We can also call it the lot size or the batch size in which we order. Now, in a production environment, you may be producing many different SKUs. So like imagine a soda company, they have different flavors, right? So Pepsi will have Pepsi and 7-Up and I don't know what else, Fanta, what other flavors they have, right? And so after you produce a batch of one drink, you need to clean your machines, and then you need to produce the next batch of the next thing, and this cleaning and getting ready for the next batch, this all has a cost called the setup cost. So you may often produce in batches which are bigger than 1 unit, because producing in 1 unit and then changing everything to go to the next SKU, then changing everything after producing 1 unit to the third SKU, the changeover cost will be too much. So instead of producing one SKU at a time, 1 unit of an SKU at a time, you want to produce, let's say, 1,000, a batch of 1,000, then change to the next SKU, produce a batch of 1,000, then do a setup for the next SKU, right? So the setup cost can drive companies to have a larger batch size or lot size and produce queue units instead of producing just 1 unit at a time. Okay, so again, determining how much to produce queue, that is a question of how much to order from your production team to say produce this much, right? Or order from your supplier. Now, the lot size or order size queue, it leads to cycle stock. Why? Because when the factory or the supplier finishes making queue units, your inventory jumps up. Look at this, where it says 1 cycle, the first part. Your inventory is like 0 or very low, a minimum level of inventory. And the inventory graph just jumps up straight up vertically because you just received an order of size Q. So you'll have a jump in inventory of size Q. Then as you use up the inventory, either by selling it, use it up because it's to the customer, or if it's a component you're using in your manufacturing, you use it up in production. Although usually the inventory management we're talking about in today's lecture is mostly about finished goods. Because when we talk about components and raw materials, we call them dependent demand items because their demand depends on the demand for the end product. And oftentimes we will handle their inventory a little bit differently. We may use MRP, material resource planning, or other ways to manage their inventory. But sometimes we may use these methods too. It depends on the situation. If you have, if you know that the demand, if you have a stock of raw materials and the demand on that stock of raw materials come from the production line, you can manage that stock of raw materials using these techniques too, but there are other ways as well. But for finished goods, these techniques are directly applicable. If you're talking about finished goods, which the customer demands or consumer demands, we can use these techniques easily. We may use them for raw materials or components as well, but at that situation, we have other options as well, not just these techniques. So just want you to keep that in mind. So we call it independent demand versus dependent demand. Independent demand means demand coming from outside our company, and dependent demand means demand coming, which is a function of the independent demand. So you got demand for the end product, and so now that demand creates a demand for the components and the raw materials. Okay, so we got maybe this is like a warehouse which is going to serve retail shops. So we receive an order from the supplier of the products. Our inventory jumps up. As we sell the products, inventory drops, or this is raw materials and we are using this type of inventory management that we're talking about to manage the raw material, which can happen, which can be feasible depending on the situation. And so, we get the raw material shipment from the supplier, then we use it up in production, goes down, then we get a shipment, then we use it up, okay? The one cycle shows you the time we take to use up one shipment, and at the end of the cycle, we need a new shipment to arrive right there. That does not mean that this is when we need the new shipment right here. Again, this is where our need is. That does not mean you place the order when you need, because there's a lead time. So you might place the order right here, somewhere here, before you need it. So order might be placed earlier in time, because the x-axis is time, because this much, this rectangle here, this time here, this represents your lead time. Okay, so you have to order lead time in advance because that's the time it takes for the next shipment to arrive, right? So this graph is not showing you when you order, it's just showing you that when the order arrives, your inventory will jump up, and then you want the next order to arrive. As you run out of inventory, you want the next order to arrive. So then you have a cycles, and this sawtooth pattern that is very famous in inventory management, the sawtooth pattern, because whenever you get a shipment, inventory jumps up, then as you consume or sell that product, it goes down, then jumps up, then goes down, then jumps up. Okay. And this happens periodically, and the average time between these vertical jumps is called a cycle. So if you are receiving shipments of size Q, then the average of this sawtooth pattern that we have drawn is going to be Q over 2. This is often called cycle stock. That it's a function of your lot size or order size Q. The bigger the Q, the bigger will be Q over 2, the average level. And the average level is important because this drives your inventory holding costs. So the higher your ordering quantity, the higher will be your average inventory level, and then the higher will be your inventory cost, inventory holding cost. So the relevant cost to determine the optimal lot size Q star, one of them is ordering cost, the cost due to placing orders or incurring setups. So the fixed part of transportation cost, like fixed cost per pickup, fixed cost for truckload shipment, or a fixed port charges per shipment, they all get added to the ordering cost. So any fixed cost that fixed for an order. So if you have 2 orders, the fixed cost doubles. If you have 3 orders, the fixed cost triples. But why I say the fixed cost? Because it doesn't change by order quantity. Whether you order 500 or 600, the fixed ordering cost is going to be the same. It's only going to increase if you place multiple orders. But for one order, the order quantity doesn't affect this cost. So there's some fixed costs, like, you may have to create a letter of credit at the bank. If to pay an overseas supplier, there may be a cost to get a letter of credit. You may have a person placing the purchase order in the system in your company, creating the purchase order, handling the customs and duties and all of that, and the salary for that person is part of the fixed cost of ordering, because the more orders you place, the more labor hours you need of this person, or you need more persons like that, and the less orders you place, the less labor hours you need of this person in your company handling all the paperwork and the administrative task of that. And then you have shipment related fixed costs, because the cost to pick up some good from a factory of a supplier and then take them to a rail carrier or a port, that may be fixed for the quantities you order, because you're not ordering a lot, and for the quantities we're interested in, that transporter charges us a fixed expense to go pick it up. Or even if the transportation cost is going to go up by the quantity, there may be a fixed part to it. So there's a fixed minimum cost of $200, and then above that, if you have more than half truckload, the cost goes up by quantity or something like that. So there may be a fixed part and a variable part of transportation cost. The fixed part of transportation cost will be added to the ordering cost. And then there's a holding cost. This is the cost of having money invested in inventory and storing and handling the inventory. And that's going to be driven by the average inventory level, which is Q over 2. So if your lot size is Q, average inventory level is Q over 2. Q over 2 is going to drive your holding cost. So the total relevant cost that we want to minimize is going to be the ordering cost plus holding cost of cycle stock. Now you might say that you are saying my order size Q is going to affect my average inventory level. That's going to affect your holding cost. Okay, so that makes sense. But you just said that the ordering cost is not increasing or decreasing by the order quantity Q. So why is that my relevant cost? Because I'm trying to figure out Q, and if a cost doesn't change by Q, why is it relevant to the decision to choose Q? The reason is that ordering cost is a function of number of orders you place. Okay, and the assumption here is that you're going to place as many orders as you need to satisfy the annual demand for your company within a year. So whatever annual demand your company wants to satisfy within a whole year, they're going to place sufficient orders of this item to be able to have enough for their annual demand. So if your order size Q goes down, your number of orders in the year goes up, and then the number of year going up will drive up ordering cost. Okay, let me show you the picture. So this picture will help you understand it very easily. So the holding cost is red. The bigger the Q, the bigger will be this red holding cost. Because you remember, average inventory level is driven by Q over 2. So the bigger the Q over 2, and the bigger the average inventory level, the bigger the holding cost. It's a linear relationship between quantity Q and the holding cost. The bigger the Q, the less the number of orders, because the number of orders is proportional to 1 over Q. So the number of orders is going to be proportional to 1 over Q, and ordering cost is proportional to number of orders. So as Q goes up, number of orders goes down, because 1 over Q is a smaller. And then as number of orders goes down, the ordering cost goes down. So you can see this blue line coming down. Okay. The total relevant cost is the blue line plus the red line, so the holding cost plus the ordering cost. That's the purple curve. So if we draw out the total cost, we get a nice curve with a minimum point, and then we can calculate using calculus this minimum point where the slope of the curve is 0. If you don't know calculus, you don't have to worry about it. I'm going to give you the formula, but if you know calculus, you know how to find the minima of a function like this. And then the minimum point is the quantity that minimizes the total relevant cost. Okay. So this is the equation of the total relevant cost, C. That's equal to Q over 2. That's going to be your average inventory level, Q over 2. times H. H is the holding cost per unit per year. So Q over 2 times H gives you the total holding cost. Plus, you get D over Q. D over Q is the number of orders you place in a year, because we're doing all this cost at an annual basis. This is the annual cost. So D over Q is the number of orders you place in a year. See, as Q goes up, D over Q will go down. And as Q goes down, D over Q will go up. And then S is the ordering or setup cost per order, okay, per lot or per order. Okay, and so D over Q is number of orders times the fixed cost per order. That gives you the total ordering cost for the whole year. So the second term in this equation gives you the total ordering cost. The first term in this equation gives you the total holding cost. You want to minimize this total relevant cost C. Once you know the equation for the total cost, you could just plot a graph of the total cost by varying Q. You say, okay, my Q is going to be between, I don't know, 10. I'm going to at least order 10 up to, I don't know, 1,000. And you vary Q from 10 to 1,000, and you plot a graph of C. And then you can see the minimum point, and you can just read off the graph, okay, what's the optimal Q to order. But we can do it faster with just a formula. So using calculus, we take the total cost function, we figure out what's the minimum point of that function, and it turns out the minimum point of that function, the minimum total cost, is going to be when Q equals Q star. So Q star equals square root of 2 times annual demand, D is annual demand, in units, times S, the ordering cost per order, divided by H, which is the holding cost to hold 1 unit in inventory for 1 year. That's H. The units are really important because you want to figure out the right value for H. So if somebody tells you, okay, it costs me $1 to hold 1 unit for 1 month, that's not H, because H is annual. So you'll multiply the $1 by 12 months in a year, and you'll say, okay, it cost us $12 to hold 1 item for 1 year, and so H is going to be $12 then. Okay, so make sure the units are match up, because D is annual demand, so H has to be the cost of holding inventory per year. If you don't have the things in annual units, you can convert them. So if you're given weekly demand, you can multiply by 52, because there are about 52 weeks in a year to get annual demand. Similarly, you can rescale H to be annual. So the formula works when the units of D and H match. It would work if D was monthly demand and H was the holding cost per unit per month as well, but I don't want to complicate things for you. And you can easily make a mistake by keeping one thing in weeks and one in month or some other units. So just the simplest thing is to put everything on an annual basis and then do the formula. So D is annual demand and H is holding cost to hold 1 unit in inventory for 1 year. Okay. So this calculation will give you the optimal quantity you need to order. And then the number of orders in the year is just going to be D over Q. And then you can find the time between orders in days. Q over D is the fraction of demand you order each time. So let's say if capital D was 1200 and Q was 100, you order 1/12 of demand each time you place an order. So Q star over D is just the fraction of the annual demand that is ordered in one order, and then times 365 converts that fraction into days. How many days is that order going to last? So this is always going to be average, and N is also average. On average, you're going to have N orders per year, and on average, you're going to have time between orders of Q star over D times 365. That's going to be in days. So TBO with units of days is going to be Q star over D times 365. Okay, it says TBO in days. Now, what if somebody asks you, give me the time between order in weeks? Then instead of multiplying by 365, you multiply this fraction Q star over D by 52 weeks, because there are 52 weeks in a year. Remember, the Q star over D fraction is the fraction of annual demand that is part of one order. So you have to multiply it by whatever weeks or days comprise 1 year, depending on the units you need. If you need TBO in days, you multiply by 365. You want TBO in weeks, you multiply by 52. You want TBO in months, you multiply by 12, and so on. If you want TBO in working days and your company is open 250 working days a year, you multiply by 250 to get how time between orders in terms of number of working days, not real days, because then the weekend days and so forth will not count. Let's do an example to really understand this calculation. So there's a Museum of Natural History, and they opened a gift shop, and they operate 52 weeks per year. Their top selling SKU is a bird feeder. Sales are about 18 units per week. So notice this is not capital D in our formula. In our formula, we said capital D is annual sales. Here we are given sales per week, but we can convert it. Okay, so don't put 18 for capital D because capital D is sales per annum, per year. The supplier charges $60 per unit. Okay, the ordering cost is $45. Annual holding cost is 25% of a feeder's value. Now, this is very common to give it something like this. So we had capital H. This is dollars per unit, dollars we spent per unit to hold the unit in inventory for 1 year, dollars per unit per year. So capital H equals small h times C, okay, where C is the item's cost, item cost. And small h is a percentage. So what we are sometimes given is that an item costs $60, that's C, and then the holding cost is 25% of the item's value because, the capital holding cost may be dominated by the cost of capital, which is a percentage value, or you might just you might just say, okay, my warehouse, more expensive stuff costs more to insure and just costs more to store, more to insure and more to store. And so I'm going to divide my warehouse expenses by the value of the items in it. And then you may get a percentage value that for a $100 item, it costs 10% to store it, and so on. So oftentimes you can have accounting help you figure this out. What is the holding cost as a percentage? Because different SKUs have different values. And then you can say, okay, for this particular bird feeder, I'm going to do 25% times $60, and that's going to give me capital H, which will be dollars per unit, which is per bird feeder per year. Okay, so you may not be given capital H in some questions. You may be given small h, which is a percentage, and the item value C, and then you multiply small h and C to get capital H. How do you know you're given small h or capital H? If you're given a percentage, like here, 25%, you're given small h, and then look for C and multiply the two to get capital H. If you're given, it costs us $2 or $5 to store 1 unit in a warehouse or in inventory, to hold an inventory for 1 year, then if you're given dollars per unit per year, you're given capital H. So the units give it away. If the units are dollars per unit per year, you have capital H, just plug it into the formula. If the units are just a percentage, then you're given small h, multiply the percentage number by the item cost or item value, and then you would have the capital H when you multiply them together. Okay. Management chose a 390 lot size, so they're ordering 390 bird feed at a time. What is the annual cycle inventory cost of the current policy? And then we calculate the EOQ, and then we calculate whether the EOQ is going to save us any money. So the current policies, we use a Q of 390, and we have a total cost equation. We can calculate the total cost of that. So to calculate the total cost, remember this is our equation right here, right here. So Q over 2 times H, that's our holding cost, plus D over Q times S, that's the ordering cost. So we know Q, the management is using a Q of 390. So we plug in 390 for Q right here. And H we found here by multiplying 25% by $60 to get capital H, which is $15 per unit per year. So if you in stock a bird feeder for 1 whole year, it costs you $15 to keep that bird feeder in your stock, in your inventory for 1 whole year. Okay, so that's capital H multiplied by 15. Then annual demand, okay, to get annual demand, we take the weekly demand of 18 times 52 weeks per year. That gives us 936 units or bird feeders we need per year. That's the annual demand. We converted the weekly demand from the question into annual demand. So we plug in 936 for D, annual demand. We divide by 390. Where did the 390 come from? The question gave it to us. Management is already currently ordering in lot size of 390 or order size of 390. So that's just what they picked. I don't know how they picked it, but that's what they picked. Okay, so we plug in, because the total cost equation works whether your Q is optimal or not. Whatever your Q is, the total cost equation works. So we can find the total cost. So we divide by Q of 390 and we multiply by 45, which is the ordering cost, which is given in the question. Right here, ordering cost is $45. Okay, and so we calculate this whole thing and the total cost comes out to $3,033 per year. Okay, notice that my holding cost here is 2925, the first part of the cost equation, and then plus my ordering cost is very small, 108. That immediately tells me I'm not doing a good job. My cost is not optimal, because look at this picture. What's true about this minimum point of the purple curve? When you have minimum total cost, the blue line and the red line intersect. So the ordering cost equals the holding cost, because you're balancing these two costs. They move differently to Q, changes in Q. So you're balancing them out. So when they balance out, when they're really equal, that's when you have the minimum total cost. So right now, we are somewhere on the right where holding cost is a lot, like $2,000+, and ordering cost is very low, like $100. So we're way to the right here with Q of 390 that the management has picked. And I know that that's not optimal because I can see that my ordering cost was $2,925 and holding cost was only $108 for a total cost of $3,033 per year. Now let's find the EOQ, optimal Q. So we plug in the EOQ formula. Q star equals square root of 2 times capital D times capital S over capital H. So 2 is just 2. Capital D is annual demand, which is 936 units per year. Again, don't put in demand in dollars here. This should be in units because H is dollars per unit. And so the units have to match. 936 units per year times 45, which is the ordering cost, and then divide by capital H. And recall, we got capital H by doing 25% of $60. That's how we got capital H. The square root of the whole thing. This comes out to 74.94 units. If the question tells you to keep the answer to 2 decimal places, you'll just put in 74.94 as the answer in a homework or exam. But in real life, you usually round it off to the nearest integer. So you'll usually make it 75. But on the exam, don't always round it up. Just look at the instructions on the exam. The exam will tell you need to give me an answer to 2 decimal places or 3 decimal places or round it up. Whatever the instructions are, do that. In this case, we round to the nearest integer and we get 75 units. That's our Q star. Notice that the management was ordering too much. They had 390. Okay. And that's too much because the holding cost is a lot, $50 per unit per year. You don't need to order 390. Okay, so we're going to order 75. Okay, and then put it in the total cost equation. So we put in the total cost equation right here, Q over 2 becomes 75 over 2 times H plus D over Q times 45. And now look at two things, observe two things. Number one, our total cost has dropped significantly. Our total cost is now $1,124 a year. Before it was $3,000+ a year. Okay, so almost 1/3 in annual cost, saving a lot of money here. And then look at the components of this total cost. Look at the holding cost and the ordering cost. They're both approximately equal. You know, when you round it up to 75, they could be like 0.02 or whatever. There could be something small attached to this where they're not exactly equal because you rounded up the Q star. If you keep Q star exactly like 74.9412, whatever the decimal places are, then you would get them to be exactly equal. But they're approximately equal, which show that we're about at the minimum total cost. Okay, so when using the EOQ quantity, the holding cost and ordering cost are equal because you're at that minimum point for the curve, as I showed you before. At the minimum point of this curve, purple curve, your holding cost and ordering costs are going to be equal. Okay, so they're equal. Now to find time between orders, we're going to take our order quantity, which is Q star, which is 75, divided by the annual demand, which is 936, and we want time between orders in days, so we multiply by 365 days a year, and we get 29.25 days. So think about what does that mean, right? So that means you're placing an order for 75 bird feeders every 29.25 days, so every 30th day, about once a month, you're placing that order. and that's going to minimize your total cost of the which is relevant to this problem, which is inventory holding cost and ordering cost. You want to minimize the sum of those two. Okay. Now let's look at economic order quantity and total cost. This curve, the total cost curve that we just saw right here, this purple curve, in real life, when you plot it for your situation, you're going to see that it's not very steep. It's a very flattish curve. So around the minimum point, if you're a little bit below or a little bit above the minimum point, your total cost is going to be not that different. So, if you have to make a few assumptions to get to the EOQ calculation, as long as you're in the ballpark of the optimal quantity, you're going to be fine because your total cost is not going to be that bad. Once you move really far, like we were in the case of the bird feed, we were 390 versus 75, our total cost was much higher. But if you're close, let's say 75 is the optimal, you're close to it, you're like 80, 85 or 60, 65, you're going to have very low total cost, similar to the minimum total cost, okay? So that's something useful to know, because what that tells you is that if you can approximately find the optimal value, that's still worth it, because as long as you're in the ballpark, you're gonna have close to the minimum cost. The total cost curve is flat around the optimal lot size, which means an approximate value of EOQ is often good enough. Which also leads us to the second point. If Q star is close to a full truckload or container load quantity, it makes sense to round it up or down to get to the full truckload or container load, because often shipping a whole container or a whole truck is going to cost you less per unit than to ship like 1.25 containers. So one full container and one container like quarter full or 30% full, right? So because of the first point that you just need to be approximately right in the order quantity, you can use other reasons to move it up or down a little bit to save money in other areas. So if it's cheaper to ship full truckloads or container loads, you may want to round the EOQ value to that. Again, similar point, if truckload shipping is significantly cheaper or faster, because sometimes it's cheaper and faster, because with the less than truckload shipping, they have to combine different customers' orders or shipments into one truck or container, and that takes time to collect all of them and then kind of load them in a certain way. So truckload shipping can be cheaper and faster, and so you may want to benefit from that, from a shorter lead time and from a cheaper shipping. And if that difference is significant, what sometimes companies will do is they'll say, okay, I'm only going to ship truckloads, so I'm only going to try values of Q for Q star that are an integer multiple of how many things I can put in a truck. So let's say your item has a certain size, you can figure out how many units you can put in a truck or a container. So let's say you could put 250 quantity in a truck or a container. Then for EOQ calculation, you'll round Q star to the nearest 250. So if your Q star was 193, you'll make it into 250 to get the full truckload. Or if your Q star was 520, you'll move it to 500, because 500 is two 250s or two trucks or two containers. So you want to have an integer number of trucks or containers, so you move your Q star around a little bit to get to that. Okay, you can compare the total cost for the EOQ answer with going with one full truckload or two full truckloads and things like that, and see which one gives you a lower cost. When you are doing that comparison, you want to factor in the lower shipping cost for a full truckload, or the benefit of getting a shorter lead time, things like that, right? So you can compare those two options. Do I order the EOQ optimal quantity, or do I order a multiple of the truckload quantity? Which one is better for me? You can do a cost benefit analysis to make that decision. So this is very important. This slide is really important because rarely, well, I shouldn't say rarely, but a lot of times you wouldn't use the Q star quantity exactly. You'll move it up or down for other considerations, like shipping a full truckload or a full container, things like that. Okay, so you need to know Q star is not some magic number that you have to be exactly on that number. You have some flexibility, and other considerations might make you, move the Q star up or down to get other benefits, like shipping costs might be lower and things like that. So when do we use EOQ? We use EOQ in make to stock settings when finished good inventory is required and demand and costs are relatively stable. By demand here we mean annual demand. Okay, within the year your demand may go up or down and have seasonality, but you have a good idea of what your annual demand looks like. Okay, and usually companies can forecast annual demand, especially at a product category level, and then you can break it down to the SKU level reasonably accurately. And then ordering and setup costs are significant. If ordering and setup costs are really small, like S, in the EOQ formula 2DS over H, S is really small, you're going to get a very small value of Q, because if there's no fixed cost with ordering, it doesn't cost you to make a lot of small orders, and then that's going to be optimal to make a lot of small orders. There could, however, be other factors that the EOQ formula doesn't consider that could be problems with many small orders, so you may want to consider those. But if there are, after you consider those factors, you may say that, okay, EOQ is not that useful. I'm just going to have, one piece flow or very small orders flowing in my system. Now, this was the basic EOQ formula we did. There are many extensions of the EOQ. So if quantity discounts are available, let's say for just one time only, not all the time, or all the time they're available, depending on the nature of quantity discounts, we have variations of the EOQ formula. So you can do EOQ with quantity discounts, and you can do EOQ with one-time discounts. If there's a big one-time discount and you want to order a large amount to take advantage of that one-time discount, things like that. So there are variations of the EOQ formula to handle different situations. And if the basic EOQ formula is not relevant, you can research up those variations and then apply a modified EOQ formula, which has a similar logic, but it kind of modifies the formula for certain situations like quantity discounts and one-time discounts. Okay? So that's it for our first look at how much to order. Obviously, we're going to look at it again when we look at some other inventory systems like the periodic review system. But this is a very basic way to model the cost and figure out a cost optimal way of figuring out how much to order. And this is something that as an operations student, you're expected to know. So hopefully you understood that and the example clarified. And if not, hopefully when you do the homework, you'll get more clarity. You can always reach out to me to ask any follow-up questions.